Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See Melanie. It's been about a month or so since I last posted a video, so I'm happy to be here today. And in today's video, we'll be talking about Tyler Perry's new movie called The 6888 that came out on Netflix a few days ago. Now, those of you familiar with my channel know that I've reviewed a few Tyler Perry properties in the past year. Mea Culpa and Divorce in the Black, and I had nothing positive to say about those movies, but to my very, very pleasant surprise, this movie, The 6888, is leaps and bounds better than any other Tyler Perry property I have seen, and so I'm happy to say that, and I'm happy to go through it today. So in this video, I'll give a recap of the movie, and in between, I'll interject some of my opinions, and at the end, I'll give my final thought. I should say I went into this movie not knowing much about it. All I knew was that Tyler Perry wrote it, that Kerry Washington was starring in it, and that it was based on a war. I didn't even know which war it was about. And I, for one, I'm not really a war movie type of person. I have never actually gone out and deliberately watched a movie about a war other than Miracle at St. Anna in 2008. And the only reason why I went to see it was because it was premiering at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, and I'm a Toronto girly. And particularly, it was showing at my old university, and I just kind of wanted to be in the theater where I graduated. So, that was it. And Michael Ealy was in it too. But yeah, so I went into this thinking, maybe military stories are more of Tyler Perry's wheelhouse because I have not been a fan of his dramatic suspense thrillers. It really struck me how much better this movie is from everything else I've seen of his, and maybe it's because this is based on true events. I don't know, but this seems to be more of his wheelhouse. And when I looked at IMDb, I noticed that there were two writers. There was Tyler Perry, and there was a man named Kevin Heimel. So I thought, oh, well, maybe this time he's actually working with other writers. But no, Kevin Heimel is a man who wrote a magazine article, I believe, about these women sometime in the past, and that's what inspired Tyler to write this movie. But he wrote it all himself. And he must have spent so much more time on this than he does on his other stuff, because again, it's just really hard to compute that a man who did Divorce in the Black and Beauty in the Black wrote this, because the difference in quality is just it's so stark. All right, let's go into the details of the story. So we meet Lena. She's a young woman. She's in high school, and she's very close with one of her classmates named Abram, who happens to be white. And of course, this is back in the 40s. Racism is, again, at an all-time high. And of course, in true Tyler Perry fashion, there is a woman, a white girl, who is harassing Lena, basically saying, you're not good enough to fraternize with this Abram guy as a black woman, of course. Anyway, so Abram and Lena are not quite dating. They have crushes on each other. They kind of circle around each other, but they're not dating. And most likely in the 40s, interracial high school romance would not really be very common. Anyway, so Abram is going off to the war. And of course, Lena doesn't want this because there's a very good chance that he could die. And so Lena and her mom, they actually work for Abram's family, and they're very wealthy. And so his family is throwing a going away party for him. And so they're working at the party. And of course, the other white people who are there, the other classmates are like, oh, Lena, you're serving us. That's your job. Okay. So Lena and Abram go off to a corner, and basically Abrams is telling her, when I come back from the war, we'll be together. So they're not quite boyfriend and girlfriend. But anyway, so Lena holds on to this. And then shortly after, we learn that Abram has indeed died in battle. Of course, this makes Lena very upset. And she eventually decides that she is going to enlist in the army in honor of Abram, kind of. She knows that her family is not really in the financial position to enroll her in university, so she thinks, oh, this is I guess the next best thing I could do. So I did some cursory Googling to see if this Abram character was real and true to the story. And I wasn't able to find anything showing that he was. And I know this is not a documentary, it is a movie. So Tyler or anybody creating a movie has, creative license. They can add certain things into it. I just don't know why he chose to add an interracial coupling, not coupling, to be the inspiration for this young Black girl to go and enlist in the army. I kind of wish he kept that out or created a different narrative around that. But the idea that like she wants like for this young woman to base her career on a man and also like on like a white young man that most likely his family wouldn't have approved of her. I didn't really care for that part of the story, but again, creative license, Tyler can do what he wants. Lena goes down to Georgia for basic training, and she goes down there by train, and even on the train, they are segregated. The white women are in one car, the Black women are in a different car. So she meets several other ladies. They become friends, and they are all from different parts of the country. They all have different backgrounds. They make it to Georgia, and they meet their major, Charity Adams, played by Kerry Washington. And of course, she gives the rundown, the typical rundown you see when you're watching a military movie. And so she tells them a couple of things, and I wrote them down. So let me just kind of read these things off. She says to them, as Black women, you are representing Negroes of America. We have a lot to prove. I need women soldiers who know what it means to struggle, who from the moment they were born, they had to fight to survive. So I'm going to interject some of my own personal opinions right here. So one thing I do not like about movies and TV shows as it pertains to Black people, and is one of the reasons why I'm not really a fan of a lot of Tyler Perry stuff, is because, for one, I do not like to see Black people struggling as a form of entertainment. I do not like to see other people abusing Black people. And I particularly don't like the idea of Black people having to prove their worth to white people. No. I understand that this is a war movie. This is a major. This was based in 1940. It's a lot different from 2024. And I'm sure that a major would say this to her battalion. I don't really like it. But again, I understand the context of it. I also don't like the idea, and I still hold this for right now, when the doings of Black people, especially when, say, they make a mistake or even like commit a crime, that is used to paint a broad brush of all Black people. I do not like that at all, because you never see that in other cases where a white person does something bad that it represents all white people. You know what I mean? And that's something that, has been the situation for like a very long time. I don't like it. Whether or not I like it or not doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And so even with this, where she says we have a lot to prove to them, because if we do badly, then they're going to think all Black people are no good for the military. Again, I will say I understand that in the context of the military, and then with all like the rampant racism, like to that degree, I understand the context of it. Still don't really like it, but those are just my thoughts. And we see the women training for the army, going through all these different drills, having to test themselves in, simulations and things like that. And also, to me, like, again, I know I'm living in 2024, but there is no way you would find me ever enlisting in the army. And again, I know a lot of people do it. I know for me personally, I would just be horrible at it. I would not want to have a major barking orders at me all day long. And I just would not be equipped to do it. I'm not equipped to be in a position to potentially kill somebody. I would be out in the field crying all day long. But luckily, I'm not in the army. You wouldn't want me in the army. Nobody would want me there. This battalion is being treated disrespectfully. We see at one point they're in a theater, and one of the white male officers is just berating Kerry Washington, just being really rude to her, calls her the N-word, and she just kind of has to sit there and take it, which is really, really infuriating. And it's just like these men, like, who are you? Why do you think you can talk to her like that? But we see that play out a couple of times in the movie. On another tangent, in regard to a completely different property, you guys should watch Interview with the Vampire if you haven't already. That is one of the best pieces of television I have ever watched in my entire life. And in that situation is very similar. The main character, a black man living in the South, is being disrespected by all these other white men around him. And because he's a vampire now, he is able to not just sit there and take it anymore. He is able to dispatch of these racist, terrible white men in a way that is like, oh, so satisfying to watch. And again, I know this is not a vampire show, but if you haven't watched the Interview with the Vampire, you definitely should go watch that this Christmas. Anyway, let's get back to the movie we're talking about. So basic training is done. Now it's time to ship off to Europe. I think they went over to Scotland. And they are very surprised when they get there and learn that they are not going to be on the field. Their job is to be in the mailroom to sort out a huge backlog of mail. Now, I would probably guess that in the eyes of military personnel, the mailroom is seen as lesser than compared to being on the field. And the field majors are probably more commemorated by the army, the armed forces in general. And I definitely understand Kerry Washington's character's disappointment in that. For me personally, I would much rather be in a mailroom than on a field where I could risk, having my arms blown off and my life extinguishing. But I do understand the frustration. And again, this backlog is humongous. It's 17 million pieces of mail. Now, the reason why this is a huge charge for the military is because a lot of people are complaining that they're not receiving mail from their loved ones in the military, and the ones in the military aren't getting mail from their loved ones back in the US. And so we meet Teddy Roosevelt and Eleanor, and we also meet Oprah's character, Miss Bethune. I forget her full name. I'll write it down here. But funny thing is, I actually didn't really know too much about these characters. Like one day randomly in the pandemic, I was like doing chores around the house and some video was playing and it was about the Roosevelts. So I learned about them. And also totally randomly, I was listening to a podcast about that new Walking Dead spinoff, The Ones Who Live. And Oprah's character, Miss Bethune, she was mentioned. So I just learned of her earlier on this year. But anyway, so they're the ones that put this together or made this a priority to get the mail sorted out, and the Black Battalion was responsible for this. And of course, when they're led to the room, the area where the mail is, the white officers are like, oh, well, can you even deal with this? Like, everything was all widespread, a lot to deal with. The conditions weren't nice. The place was very cold, and they were kind of set up to fail because these other officers just have no respect for these Black women. The uncle from Breaking Bad, I think his name was Hank, the detective, I can't remember, but he is the one who gives Kerry Washington this responsibility. And he says, you have 6 months to do it. And he doesn't think that they'll be able to accomplish this task in 6 months, but we learn later on they do it in 3 months. In Europe, they are still segregated. So the Black officers, they are not able to or allowed to go to the same places as the white people. So even in terms of, their social element when they're there. So Kerry Washington is told, to keep up morale or whatever, they create some kind of a soiree of some sort. And so the Black women and the Black men, the soldiers, they have a party. And one thing I'll say that I really did like about this is like the set design and the jazz music was really, really nice. Like I'm kind of partial to the 40s, 50s aesthetic. And so the set design on this show was pretty good for the most part. So one day when the women are working a regular day as per usual, an officer comes in and he's barking at Kerry Washington, telling her that this system is flawed and that mail is not going out the way it should. And that officer, he looked familiar. That is Austin Nichols. He played Spencer from The Walking Dead. I was a huge Walking Dead fan. Anyway, after he leaves, Kerry asks the women, what's going on? And at that point, they mentioned that there are some problems with some of the pieces of mail. Like, say, for example, some pieces of mail are directed to just the first name of the person, or the address might be smudged. Some have been attacked by pests, so it's hard to read. the address information, and so on. So one thing I will say is that, I'm sure that this was a problem. This probably is a problem right now in regular mail, but I do believe just how close the women were and how um, inviting or open Kerry Washington's character seemed to be, that these problems, I'm sure, would have been issues beforehand, and Kerry Washington's character would have known about this. It just seemed like everything kind of happened pretty quickly, but that is a small nitpick. So after we assess these problems, the women, they take their background in different things to figure out a system as to how to fix and how to direct these pieces of mail that are kind of unclear. So there's one lady who is a journalist or a historian. She has historical information to kind of deduce, oh, this might be going to this part of the world. They also have a station that has mail that has been sprayed by perfume. And so one woman, she was able to ascertain that this perfume is popular in the Pacific Northwest or in Southern California or in the East Coast or whatever. To me, that seemed a little far-fetched, but I appreciate the idea. Anyway, yeah, so they look into all their backgrounds to figure out ways to create a system that will let these pieces of mail go out properly. And so they do that. So this just goes to show the ingenuity of these women. And of course, this ingenuity is very common, especially for Black people, and they are able to best the system and they're able to get the mail out. Later on, the guy from Breaking Bad comes back to assess the entire operation. So he assesses their living quarters and he's questioning them like, oh, you guys have a hair salon room here. Like, what are you doing wasting the military's money on that? It's like, don't you worry about those details, okay? As long as everything's getting done, why do you care if they've got a salon there? Silly man. Anyway, and so later on, he goes into the mail room and they show them all these different systems that they have created to help in the mailing process. They get to one where he notices that the mail has been opened and they say, well, we have to open it up to kind of deduce where it's supposed to go. And he says, oh, it's illegal to open the mail. And that did cross my mind when they mentioned that earlier on. I don't know when the law about not opening somebody else's mail came about, but desperate times, like it's not a big deal. Like, cause he said, oh, you're reading the mail of these white people, of the white soldiers and the white families, you Black women. It's like, first of all, who cares? Like, they can read the mail of anybody, doesn't matter what race they are. And also, it's like, these things, like, who really cares? Like, if them reading the mail helps a mother in Kansas, reach out to her son over here, I don't think it really matters if anybody is reading that mail, as long as it's getting to where it needs to go. And so he is telling her, you're not running the place properly. We need somebody who is better than you to run this place. And this is where Kerry Washington's character, Charity Adams, she says enough already. And she is insubordinate, i.e. she speaks up for herself and says, no, over my dead body, essentially, you're not taking me off this operation. We've got a good thing going here, so you're not going to scare me. And I think he kind of walks off. They don't really get into a confrontation after that. But afterwards, we see Kerry Washington with another character, and she's talking. She's like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe I was so insubordinate to my superior and things like that. She goes back into the mail room and apparently the women had stopped working. And at first she thought, oh my gosh, are we being shut down or like what's going on? She gets there, they basically slow clap and they're very excited and they're impressed by, how she stood up for herself and for them in their operation. And so she is, her heart is warmed from that. And this basically takes us to the end of the movie. So there's one point, I think, where the guy from Breaking Bad is talking to his colleagues about ceasing operation or removing Kerry Washington's character from it when he hears some stuff going on outside, and it's the mail carriers. So basically all this mail is coming in from the US and all the people in the US are receiving their mail from their soldier loved ones. And so the operation is a success, obviously, right? Because of all the things that Kerry Washington and her battalion of women put together. And so one day the group of them are walking into one of the rooms, for lack of a better word, I don't know what you call it, but a soldier, a white soldier, said, "Hey, are you Charity Adams, Major Charity Adams from the mail department?" And she says yes, and they salute her. They thank her for all their hard work. I think that they get like a round of applause, and everyone is happy because the mail is going well. And even the same man who was in the theater, the one who called her the N-word, he gives her a nod. He also should have apologized, but you know. But yes, and so I think that's basically the end of the story. And I should also mention, like throughout it, Lena mentions that she is looking for any kind of correspondence from Abram because he said at the beginning he would write to her to, you know, let her know what's going on and things like that. And so we see at some point earlier on, she sees the letter from Abram and she's very, you know, touched by it. And she goes out to his burial site because also another thing I forgot to mention is at one point when some of the women were going to collect the mail, they were out on their Jeep or like their truck and they hit a UXB, an unexplode bomb. And they are unfortunately they're killed and there are 5 of them. They lost 5 members of their battalion. So that was, you know, obviously very sad. So after they get all the accolades and applause from their fellow soldiers there, that's basically the end of the story. We learned that they took their operation to France too. And it wouldn't actually surprise me if some of the learnings that they came across in this operation were probably brought back to the USPS and France's general, you know, posting service for the country. So, and we see some clips of real life. A lot of the women, or a fair amount of the women, are actually still alive, which is neat. And we see a clip of Michelle Obama commemorating them and so on. And so, yeah, that's basically it. So, this is a nice story. This, again, is a story that I'm sure a lot of you guys haven't heard of. I, for sure, hadn't heard of it. Again, I am Canadian, and so a lot of the topics of war that I learned in elementary and high school were from a Canadian perspective. And this is a lesser known story. And, you know, most times when you read about the war, you hear about things on the battlefields, right? The logistics, like the food preparations, the medics, and like the mail services are less glamorous, less sensational, so they don't get their shine. So I think it's very good that this movie was put out to shed some light on this part of the military. Also, of course, knowing in certain states like Florida, where a lot of stories are and books are banned, especially ones that show white people in a negative light and Black people in a positive one. You know, this story might not get out to a lot of the people. So I think it's good that this movie is out there on Netflix so people can learn about it and they can do their own research, I guess, online and things like that. And so, yeah, again, I have to say, this show, this Tyler Perry property, is leaps and bounds better than anything I've seen of his in the past. And it's just, he must have put more time into this, quite frankly. And, you know, when I reviewed Divorce in the Black, we saw that he put out that he did that interview where he called, you know, Black people reviewing his stuff who didn't like it highbrow Negroes, right? Even though he is the one who's worth, what, $1 billion, and I for sure am not. Anyway, this just goes to show when he puts some effort into it, he can do some pretty good stuff. So yeah, I would say, again, it's holidays. If somebody were to say, you know, oh, Tyler Perry has a new show on Netflix, new movie on Netflix, should I watch it? I would say, yeah, you definitely should. I would not say that about any other thing I've watched of his. I should also mention, I knew Beauty in the Black was coming out and I planned on reviewing it. And I watched the very first episode and I said to myself, there is no way. For one, I can stomach 7 more episodes of this. And also, if I were to do videos on it or a video on it, it would just be hate. And I do not want to be overly negative when I do reviews on here. So there would be no point. But this was a really good story. I thought it was pretty well done. There are like a few slight critiques I have of this, and they are very, very small, but some things I did notice. Again, I mentioned the set design was beautiful. I love the styles of the clothing. I love the styles, like, the wallpaper and like all the different set dressings. I thought was really good. And even the very first scene, I looked at it, I'm like, wow, this looks very, big and expansive and pretty cinematic. But the CGI was pretty bad. Like the explosions where you see, the dust kind of like, blow up. It looked really bad. Also, the fire in that scene, like, they need to work on their CGI for that. And there are some, again, nitpicking, but there was a scene when they're going across on the boat. And it's dark, they're in very choppy water, and the boat is smooth sailing. Very smooth, no interruptions, no resistance, no bobbing or anything like that. Where, with that type of water, there was no way that boat would sail in that manner. So I think he could spend a little bit more time in kind of fine-tuning some of the details. Also, there was another scene with the plane, and the women are in the plane, and it zeroes in to the window. Now, that one I give a bit of a pass because I think it was meant to look a little surreal, but it did look very, very fake. But again, that one can give a pass for the look they were trying to go for that. Or I assume so. Also, this is questionable too. Like some of the dialogue was a little not so great, especially at the beginning with Lena and Abram. It's a little corny, but oftentimes when you watch period pieces, the conversations and the dialogue was always kind of corny. So I give that a pass. And plus, they were a teenage star-crossed lovers, so I'm not going to pay that too much mind. And as I mentioned before, this is a movie. It's not a documentary. So I'm sure there are elements in here that have been kind of zhuzhed up to make it better as a piece of entertainment. I can't say I know the entire story to know, okay, that was a fabrication or that was an exaggeration. But I think for the purpose of this entire show, to showcase these women who had such a pivotal role in World War II, I think I did a good job. So yeah, my critiques, they are very small. They are like CGI, and it's like, in the scheme of things, that's not really like the biggest deal in the world. So, yeah, I am impressed by this. I am very happy to say that, and it's good. This is Tyler Perry is like one of the biggest like Black producers, directors out there, and this is actually good, passable content. Like the other stuff just isn't, in my opinion. So I'm very happy that this movie is as good as it is. And you know what? Okay, so when I do reviews, I don't like to read or watch other people's reviews of the movie or TV show before I have at least written down my script, because I don't want other people's opinions to kind of taint what I say, for better or for worse. But I did look at some of the critic ratings. The ratings were in the 50% area, like 5 out of 10. And I actually thought that was kind of low. I didn't think it was deserving of that, because I think the story is pretty good. Now, I don't know the exact story, and I don't know how much creative license Tyler took and what things are just plain wrong or embellished or just bad to the story, the real story. I have no idea. But I don't think it's at the 50% level. If you were to ask me what number I would give this movie, I would say if out of 10, I would probably give it like a 7. I think it's pretty good in terms of the execution. Like the story is the story of what happened in the world in World War II. But in terms of like the actual presentation, I would say a 7. So yeah, again, I'm very happy to be giving a positive review to a Tyler Perry movie. And yeah, I suggest you watch this during the holiday break with your family and other people who don't really know the story. So yeah, so that's basically it for me right now. Thank you for watching my review here on I See Melanie. I would love to know what you all think. So please leave some comments in the comments area. We can start a discussion, and I'll see you later with the next video. Okay, bye everyone.